Yeah.
Were you destined to be a lawyer with your dad being it and
Sort of, yes. I really decided to be a lawyer when I was, I think, about 12 years old. And I know that sounds really, really young, and it certainly is very young, but there were two reasons for that. Well, the most, really one reason, and that was that my dad and I were extremely close. Our personalities were very, very similar, and we got along so well. And and as I got into my early teens, right around then, like 13, he would start talking to me. He would come home, and sometimes at the dinner table, but other times just the two of us. And he would talk about some of his cases and his clients and, this, that, and the other thing. And it just appealed to me because of that. And, you have to be pretty logical if you're a lawyer, as you well know. I think most of us are. That you better be, or you're in some serious trouble. So that's when I wouldn't say destined, but, became... It was very likely that I would become a lawyer. I mean, sort of like Bill Wright Jr. and Steve and Tad. That's pretty likely to happen.
by the way, for the camera, who was your dad?
Oh, my dad, Willard E. Perlee, and
was your parents, grandparents, were any of them in the law, or was your dad the first guy to venture in that?
he was the first person. My paternal grandparents were working class people, as many people were. My dad was born in 1918, and his father was a garage mechanic, and he owned his own business, he and another guy, working with their hands, doing all kinds of important stuff that people do for us who work with their hands. Mm-hmm. And my grandmother, my Nana, was basically just at home and taking care of my father and his sister. And but when he graduated from high school, he got a full scholarship to Colgate University. And my Nana knew that he was going to, even though it paid for everything basically except maybe books and whatever all the incidental expenses might be. So she, right out of the blue, I think she went and worked maybe for a year, and I think she did this while he was still in high school, at a beauty salon, and sort of learned the trade. And when he went to Colgate, she was going to be earning some of that extra money that he needed because, they weren't well off. And so she was, and he got her personality and drive and all of that. And she was really the driving force in the family. So he went to Colgate on a full scholarship. And I to this day, I'm very biased, obviously, but he's the smartest person I've ever met. And he graduated third in his class, of course, Phi Beta Kappa, and he graduated summa cum laude. And as a matter of fact, but for a B that he got in history from his history teacher, he would have been the valedictorian. What happened was he was the captain of Colgate's debate team. And they were traveling all over the country. When he told me these stories, they took the train out to California. They debated Stanford and the University of California, and they debated at the University of Chicago. They were really, for a small school, a pretty top team. Well, at any rate, he had to go on these trips. And the history professor had, as many of them did then, an attendance requirement. And my dad, I probably missed maybe over the course of, a couple of years, he might have missed It wouldn't have been that. It would have been the year he took this particular course. And when he was gone, so he was probably missed maybe, you know, 4 or 5 times. And at the end of the year, the last semester, he went in to see the professor, who gave him a B. And he said, whatever the guy's name was, you know, why I've got straight A's in your class. Why is this a B? And he said, well, Willard, you didn't meet the attendance requirement. And my dad said, well, and it's a small school, Professor so-and-so, you know that I was not just cutting class, I was out of town with the debate team, and so on and so forth. And when the debate coach heard this, he actually went and talked to this history professor, who said, well, that's all well and good, but it didn't meet my standards. So, you know, you got to learn to live with stuff like that. Sure. So anyway, he did really well there, and then wound up with a full scholarship to Yale Law School, and got interrupted by World War II. He finished his first year, and then Pearl Harbor happened. He enlisted in the U.S. Naval Reserves, and he went out to Chicago and got into that program. They used to call them the 6-week wonders. Mm-hmm. And he was in, along with a lot of other people here, a few other lawyers too, Raleigh's book, you know, A Hometown Went to War. And so he was very lucky, and, you know, came home all in one piece, and that was great. He went back to law school and finished his last 2 years at Yale. My mother was a teacher. She went to New Paltz, what was then New Paltz State College, which was a teacher's college and was only 3 years. But that's what was required there. And when he graduated, he went to Rochester and started with a firm called Whitbeck and Holleran, and he was the junior guy. And Mr. Whitbeck controlled the business from what became Marine Midland Bank, but was then the Genesee Valley Trust Company. And so things were going along pretty well, and he was there for probably 4 or 5 years, 4 years or so. And he started in 48, if I'm not mistaken. That's when he got his license and passed the bar. Mr. Whitbeck died. And there were a bunch of other attorneys on the board, lost the business, and Holleran said to him, Willard, he said, you're a wonderful young lawyer, and he said, I wish I could keep you, but there's only enough for one person now. So that's what brought him to Jamestown. He was driving down with my mom after he had gotten the job here. He went in, you probably remember this or have heard it certainly, with Fancher, his name, Rollin, thanks. And they were in the Hotel Jamestown building. And then he worked with Rollin for a couple of years, and then, as you know, Fancher ran for the Supreme Court and was elected. And so then my dad went out on his own, and you know, it was just, you know, Willard E. Perlee, attorney at law. He was over there for a fair amount of time, and then moved over to the Hotel Jamestown, I think in '72, and I was in law school then. And he was worried about whether or not, if there were a fire, whether anybody would be able to get out of the Wellman building. But of course, with the hotel being concrete, he felt a lot better about that. So yeah, he did quite well for himself. And one of the things that he was always, and he mentioned this to me before I ever came back to join him, but he said, Rennie, he said, it's really wonderful how the legal community, the attorneys in Jamestown, accepted me, because it was all kind of a sort of a closed little area. But he said everybody, so many people, the Wright brothers and the Prices and Sherry Cadwell, all those types of people, were so, very kind to him and didn't view him as an outsider and, you know, trying to take our business or anything like that. And so he said, "You're coming back to a really wonderful legal climate." And he was, of course, exactly right, and it's really continued that way. So, yeah, I graduated from George Washington University Law School I went to Colgate also. Did pretty well, but I wasn't close to what my dad did. After I graduated from Colgate, I went to George Washington University Law School, which is, they call it the National Law Center, which I was, you know, and all of these law schools have names for themselves, but I always just said GW Law School. But when I told people I was in law school and I was in Washington, D.C., even when I said GW Law School, "Oh, Georgetown." they were the pinnacle, I guess. But at any rate, it was a interesting law school. It was only 2 blocks from the White House, and I really enjoyed it there. It was one of the biggest law schools in the country. It might still be, because they had a huge night division. I think we had maybe like 600-700. Maybe even 800 in the day version, and then another 500 at night, because DC is so, you know, litigious, and you need to have a lot of lawyers down there. So it was really interesting. And I graduated in 1973. That would have been, you know, May. With honors. I was happy I was able to do that, and actually became a member of the Law Review. So I did better in law school than I did at Colgate. But, you know, that's all wonderful about, you know, you achieve this, you achieve that, but that's really not what your life is about. And so I was so happy to come back here, and I think I started July 1st of 73, and you know, as an associate, or probably not even that then, because I hadn't passed the bar. Spent a lot of the summer in a bar exam course up in Buffalo. I don't know where'd you go to law school? In New York State?
No, in Pennsylvania, Dickinson.
Okay, so then you had the same problem about the CPLR, where if you don't go to school in New York State, you don't have a chance of passing the bar exam, at least back when we were doing it, unless you took a bar course. So passed the bar, and that was great. And I think the admission was it's usually like February or something like that. So we started practicing together, and we didn't, you know, it wasn't like, well, okay, now we're going to be Perlee and Perlee right away. So, you know, after about, I think, probably 4 years, my dad said, well, okay, it's time to make it Perlee and Perlee. I said, well, Dad, that would be great, but have you ever considered he said, well, it's not going to be Perlee and Son, it's going to be Perlee and Perlee. And I said, well, okay, but have you ever considered Perlee and Father? And he laughed. He had a good sense of humor. He wasn't a guy who would walk up to you and tell you a joke or something like that, but he had a wonderful sense of humor. Areas, estates, corporate work, which was, you know, smaller businesses, you know, incorporating people, buy and sell of purchases and sales of the businesses, and so on, and then real estate, which is kind of the staple that everybody, you know, sort of relies on, and I really enjoyed that. We did a few other things. We definitely didn't do any criminal cases. My dad said, this is a civil practice, and he said, I just don't want to be involved in that. And I was in perfect agreement with him. And so he he did have clients who every once in a while would have maybe not the client himself, but his brother or niece or a child, and he would take that but only if it was a current client. And didn't have many of them, but he disliked that intensely. So when I got there, he said, "Rennie, you're in charge of whatever divorces we do." And I said, "Okay, I'm not thrilled about it, but I'll go along with that." And I had the same feeling that he did about the divorce practice. At some of it, part of it is the difficulty of not being just the lawyer for your client, but really kind of being a psychologist or a counselor. And I don't know if have you handled a few divorces? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And boy, it just takes so much extra time. I mean, you can't just kick them out the door, because they're going through hell, a lot of them. So finally, we got to the point, and I said, "Dad, I don't want to do any more of these." And I said, even if it's a client of ours or a child, we should farm it out. And I was already very good friends with John Samuelson, who of course has always done a large part of his practice has been domestic relations. And I said, "John is a guy who will do a great job." And I said, "If these people are good clients of ours, John is not the type of guy who's going to say, 'Yeah, you need to come over to me, and I'll do your will and all that stuff.'" And that's exactly what John did. We reviewed, I don't know a lot, but quite a few over there to him. And John and I were good friends. We didn't know each other in high school. He was a year ahead of me. And but he would call me up. This is the collegiality of attorneys here in town. And say, "Rennie," he said, "I've got this question in this estate I'm doing. And, what should I do here?" And so I would give him the advice. And he would do the same. He was doing the same for us by taking those domestic relation cases. So that's one of the wonderful things about, I'm not quite sure if the lawyers are as close personally as it used to be back in the day, which now back in the day for you and me, Greg, is 30 years ago. So it's an interesting thing, but I really, really enjoyed practicing with him. I cannot remember the name of the case, but when I got back there, he told me about a case, and it was a very simple case, basically. Well, there was a issue that wasn't so simple, and I can't remember what it was, but he had a client, and it might have had to do with traffic law, or it might have been a real estate thing or something like that. But he took it all, he lost in Supreme Court and lost at the appellate division, and then petitioned a court of appeals, and they took it, and he went and argued it, and he won it.
Okay, wow.
So, it's not too often that you get a chance to do that type of stuff. So this reminds me about some of our clients, people who were good clients of ours. And one of the first things, well, a lot of things my dad said to me was, and I was lucky to be the son of a lawyer. It was so much easier for me and for the Wright brothers and Tripp Price than it was for you and John Plum and Rick Sotier and all that. It just, I think you guys had a tougher row to hoe. Yes, my dad said to me a couple of things. He said, "Rennie," and this is the way we were raised, and I know your parents raised you this way, "you treat everybody in this world as your equal. Just because they work with their hands or are a farmer or anything like that, they're just as good as lawyers, doctors, and Indian chiefs, and the whole 9 yards. And so he said, we're always going to go the extra mile to be friendly, and even if we have bad news for our clients, and treat them with respect. And I said, I know that, Dad, but and he said to me, some of the lawyers, not too many around here, but some of them are still got that looking down their nose type of thing with some of their clients. But he said, I never want to do that. And part of it had to do with where he came from in terms of his family. But that was one thing. And the other thing he said is, be pleasant, be kind, and when you are calling secretaries of other lawyers or the county clerk's office or Chautauqua Abstract Company, because he said, if you are kind of short with them and, get me this right away and do this and so on and so forth, he said, those people can hurt you in terms of if you offend them a lot, maybe your stuff goes to the middle of the pile. And which made a lot of sense to me, but I like to think I would do that anyway, but he felt it was important to make that point. So, and I think, you find that out pretty quickly on. So when it came to some of his clients, he had some that were interesting. He had a guy, and he said, you never know who has a lot of money and who doesn't have a lot of money. And he had a guy who was a farmer out in Niobe. I probably shouldn't use any names, but I mean, the guy's long dead and so on. But my dad was looking for somebody who could provide him with a face cord of wood, every year for his fireplace. And he got a recommendation to this guy. And he came, delivered it, put it right where my dad wanted and everything. My dad paid him. There was never a workman who came in our house who didn't become a client of my dad's, because he was really interested. He was not handy. He wasn't like a mechanic the way his father was, but he was relatively handy, and he was always interested in how other people did things, plumbers, carpenters, all that type of stuff. And that came across to them. So anyway, sometimes this guy would come with his truck, and sometimes his wife came with him. And she would bring some flowers. And I can remember my sister Susie, who graduated with you, of course. She had these flowers and wanted to know if, my mom would like to buy them. And, they were sort of shabbily dressed, And so my sister said to her, she was probably 10 or something like that, or maybe a little older. She said, "Oh, Mommy, we have to buy these clothes or these flowers." And my mom says, "Oh, sure." So she did that. And when this man passed away several years later, at the time, he had an estate worth $100,000. Now, this was back in the late 70s or early 80s, when that was a ton of money, and that was back when you started paying federal income tax if you had more than $60,000 in your gross estate. That's so different from now. And so, my dad was floored, but, wonderful estate. It all went to her. And a few years later, when she died, we handled that estate pretty much the same amount of money. And, you just never, you have to, and that's just an instance of how you can't judge a book by its cover. Sure. So, but my dad wouldn't have had a problem if he'd had an estate of $10,000. But it was just, wow. Obviously didn't live the life. But of course he was a farmer and, guy who cut wood and all that. So that was really a lesson to me. One that was actually one that I was part of. And then he had another guy. This guy I don't think I ever met. But it was after my dad left Fancher's office and was finally, I think he was in the Hotel Jamestown building. But at any rate, this guy came in, and my dad represented a fair number of people from outside of the city of Jamestown, like, this guy that I told you about was in Niobe. And he had quite a few clients in Clymer. At any rate, I'm not sure if this guy was from Clymer, but I don't think he was living in town. He came in and, previously, I guess I would say my dad had to tell clients, and this is before I got back with him, people would come in and say, I've got this problem, I want to sue this guy. And my dad said, if you're,
That's right.
is it okay?
Yeah.
As long as I don't stand on it. If you want to sue somebody and you want me to sue them, I'm going to sue them. The guy would say, I want you to threaten to sue so-and-so. My dad said, I don't threaten people. I threaten to sue people. I just sue them, because I'm not going to be a guy who says, my client, John Jones, is going to sue you if you don't so-and-so. And the guy says, I'm not doing that. And then John Jones says, I don't want to go forward with it. My dad says, I'm not going to give up my reputation. When people say Willard Perlee is suing you, you're getting sued. So, and people didn't seem to understand that, but I think that's probably something that most attorneys would do. But it struck me as interesting. The other thing was, this other guy would come in, and he was very difficult to deal with. My dad had done his wills and maybe a real estate and so on, and so he was a fairly good client. But he came in and he wanted to, this follows the suing somebody thing. He came in and wanted to sue somebody for something. My dad said, you don't have a case. You can't, and we would do that, and I'm assuming you guys do too from time to time. On the other hand, some lawyers, I want to sue this guy, boom, sue him. Yeah. So he said, I want to sue this guy and for this and that. And my dad gave him the thing. Well, we're not going to do that. He said, well, okay, but how about if you just give me a couple of your letterheads, and I'll write a letter to the guy. My dad, I wasn't there because it was before I was with him, but my dad said he blew his top and said, you are crazy, and really loud. And he said, get out of my office and don't ever come back. So every once in a while you get a client like that. Fortunately, most of them are not like that.
Your practice, Rennie, was pretty much civil, was civil.
Yep.
But yet you became an associate judge in the city of Jamestown.
Yep, the acting city court judge.
And then, first of all, how did that happen? And what was that experience like, since that's principally criminal?
That's exactly right. This is how it happened. Getting attorneys in Jamestown to be the acting city court judge was very difficult, because most attorneys...
And the city judge at the time was that Sam?
Was Sam, yeah.
Okay.
He'd been the judge for quite a while. The full-time... Well, first he was not a full-time judge, and then finally the city made it a full-time judgeship. So Sam was the guy. My dad... as you may know, was the acting city court judge back in the late 60s under Lester Berglund.
Oh my God, I did not know that.
Yeah. And so the problem with a full-time attorney doing the acting city court thing was that you could not you and or the people in your firm could not practice in city court. And so a lot of attorneys, younger ones, older ones, pick them, were not willing to do it. Not to mention that the amount you got paid, and I'll get to that in a minute, they just couldn't afford it. Even if they thought, hey, this would be a good learning experience and all that. So it was hard to get an acting city court judge. I was asked 2 times, sometime in the late 70s, like maybe 78 or something, and then again, and this was when somebody who was on the bench was, as the acting judge, was, not going to do it anymore. And then the second time was probably maybe 82 or 3. And they asked me again. I said, no, I just don't want to, I was just too busy. So I looked at it, and they came to me a third time. And I think Park Catchpole was the acting judge who was leaving when, and I think he was pretty much retired, so it wasn't a problem for him, but he just didn't want to do it anymore. And I said to my dad, I'm not going to get paid very much, but I said, you have to be admitted to practice law. It's not like a justice court. And so there needs to be a acting city court judge, even though it wasn't a court of record. That was the rule in Jamestown and pretty much every other city in the state, even the small ones. You had to be admitted to the bar. So I said to him, I'm giving some thought to doing this. What do you think? And he said, well, Rennie, he said, it's not going to be a tremendous amount of time. I said, I'm looking at this as doing something for the community and the city that a lot of other people can't do for very valid reasons. Because we never did anything with rentals or anything like that, or certainly any of the criminal stuff. So he said, well, if you think it's a good idea, and I said, okay. And Patty and I were married at the time. It was in 1985, and we got married in 81. She came here, and I said, well, what do you think about this? And she said, well, if you want to do it, she said, I think you'd be good, and so why don't you go ahead and do it? So that's how I got into the job. And Sam, as I mentioned in the eulogies we were doing for him, was so helpful because I had no criminal background in terms of handling criminal cases. He was so helpful to me in terms of he had a whole thick binder of things that he knew were very important, and he would go through some of this stuff with me, and this is what you do here. I knew the basics of objections and all of that stuff, but if you haven't been doing it, it really helps to see somebody else do it. So at any rate, and when I got there, this was 1985, the annual salary for Jamestown acting city court judge was $3,000 a year. So I costed out my time one time. It was right around $1 an hour in terms of what I was getting paid. Now, I did have access to a really good health insurance plan through New York State. That was really much more important than what I was or wasn't getting paid. That's how I got involved with being the acting city court judge, and I was kind of proud to be following in my dad's footsteps, and the fact that he had done it for quite a few years, right when he went out on his own. He wasn't practicing in city court himself, so I think when Lester Berglund was the judge then, he would sub for Lester when he was either ill or on vacation or whatever. Here's a story about my dad in city court. That's when the old city hall was on the across the street on the corner of the other corner of Spring and 3rd Street. He had a woman who came in several times, and her husband was consistently beating her. This is over a period of several months. And the police would go, they'd arrest him, put him in jail, she'd bail him out, or maybe back then they probably didn't release him on his own recognizance, I don't know. But at any rate, she would take him back, and then the court case would come up, and she would come with him, and either Lester or my dad, whoever theirs, but my dad was there several times, he would say, "How do you plead?" "Not guilty." And he said, "Well, Mrs. Jones, you're the complainant here. Are you not going to testify, or do you want to withdraw the complaint?" "Yes, Your Honor, I want to withdraw the complaint." This happened like three or four times over a period of maybe a year. Might have been less than that. Anyway, not important. She came back. She did this one time, and he was arrested, and he just beat the hell out of her, and all kinds of bruises, black eyes, and all over her body. And she said she came in before my dad, and I don't think he was there. I think that maybe he hadn't been brought into court. And he called the case, and she came up, and he said, "Mrs. Jones, you're here again, and your husband's charged with assault. What are you going to do?" "I want to withdraw the complaint." He said to her, "This doesn't make any sense." He said, you're being beaten up consistently, but you keep taking him back." And she said, "Well, Your Honor, I don't work, and we have 3 or 4 children, and if he goes to jail, we won't have anything to live on." And so she said, I don't really have any choice." Well, he said, "You can't keep coming back to court, and there's no point to it." And she said, "Well, Your Honor," and then you withdraw the complaint. She said, "Well, Your Honor, what should I do?" She said, "I don't know what else I can do." So my dad, I think he was really upset with this guy. And I think without really thinking about it too much, just off the top of his head, he said, "Next time he comes after you, hit him over the head with a baseball bat." In court. So she said, "Well, okay." A month later, she comes in charged with assault against her husband. And he said, my dad saw her there, and he said, "Mrs. Jones, what's this assault about? It says that you hit your husband." She said, "Well, Your Honor, he started to beat me up, and I did what you told me to do. I grabbed a bat and hit him over the head." My dad looked at her and said, "Case dismissed."
That's cute.
You couldn't get away with any of that now, but back in the day, and my dad was kind of telling that had told that story around town a lot to people, other lawyers, about that kind of weird situation.
You were not known in the criminal law circles. Was there an attorney or two, and you don't have to name them, but who said, "Hey, this guy's a rookie, I'm going to take advantage of him"? Did you feel that at all?
No, I really didn't. And I think the attorneys knew right away. They knew me well enough to know that I was a no-nonsense guy, and that was right from the beginning. Sam was a good judge. He was very forgiving and lenient, and he would give people multiple chances. That's not to say that wasn't good necessarily, but everybody's different. I was more the type, if you keep doing this, you're not going to throw somebody in jail the first time for, something. but if you keep doing this, you're going to go to jail. And I had people people came in front of me for parking tickets. I had a guy, he was one of these Italian dancers who used to dance together at the Italian festivals. Can't remember his name. But he had like, I don't know, $450 in unpaid parking fines. So back then, Sam and I the police department would want a warrant signed for their arrest. I signed it like that. I think Sam did too. And the guy came in and I said, you owe $450. It hasn't been paid in over a year. And I said, you're going to pay this no later than tomorrow. He said, all of it? I said, all of it. He said, well, I don't have it. I said, maybe you need to borrow the money from a friend or your family, or maybe you need to get another job. I don't know. That's not the city's problem. So he said, well, I'm not doing that. I said, well, let me put it to you this way. If the money isn't brought into city court in cash tomorrow, I said, there'll be a warrant for your arrest, and when you come before me, you're going to go to jail. You can't do that, he said. I said, Mr. So-and-so, I absolutely can do that, and I will do it. The money came in the next day. There's an awful lot of people in the world who try to take advantage of other people. And it's not fair, to the city, obviously. And that means our taxes, everybody else's taxes go up when, there's a whole bunch of unpaid parking tickets. So that was one time. And I had some younger attorneys come in for some trials, or representing not too many trials. I probably had maybe the whole time I was there. I was there from 1985 to the end of 1993, which was 8 years, and that's when Sam retired, and the city court judgeship was up for election, and that's when I ran for that.
Do you miss it?
Sometimes, but I don't miss the law so much as I miss doing it with my dad. And I started, when he retired at the end of 1999, and he was 82. He was born in 1918. We sat down and talked about it, because he liked coming to the office, but it wasn't a situation where, you've heard the stories from Sam and Charlie Price about Wilson Price coming and reading the paper and so on. We were not in that kind of situation. So he was forgetting some things, and he knew it. And so I said, I think you need to retire at the end of 1999. You've completed the century. And so he was admitted in 1948 and retired in, we'll say, 2000. So that's 52 years. Yeah, practiced a long time. I thought I would just go along by myself, but I knew that was going to be really, really hard. So out of the blue, Bob Rahm calls me up and says, would you be interested in this assistant VP trust officer down in PNC Bank, PNC Advisors. Well, I just want to say, I guess, maybe in closing, because I'm going on way too long. I know you'll edit.
No, it's all good.
But at any rate, all of the attorneys in town, and by which I mean not just those in our generation, but the Prices and the Wright brothers, the ones who are gone now, and everybody else were very, very respectful. They didn't try to take advantage of me. They were kind. I had a lot of deals with, I think, Bill Wright, and a little bit with Bud, and with Sam and Charlie Price. And I knew these guys from when I was a kid. You know, hi, Mr. Wright, hi, Mr. Price, so on and so forth. And so I wasn't in the habit of calling them by their first names, but they were really, really professional, the way you would hope that everybody in the legal profession would be.